Hey, good morning, team. It is Tuesday, September 3rd. I'm Amy Corr. I'm back with Kevin Van Eck, and we are in the Goose Island office. And wow, it's already September. We are moving. Well, this morning, we want to touch back on a concept we talked about a couple of weeks ago. But now that we are past August 17th, getting into this new normal, we wanted to touch on this idea of being curious, right? As a way of growing your business, building your confidence. Are you curious about everybody's coffee?
I'm curious.
Yeah.
What do you got in there?
I don't know what you have, but make sure you get it. It's piping hot because we're going to jump into the next episode of Coffee with Amy and Kevin. Curious.
Good morning, Amy.
Good morning,
everyone. Yes, we're going to get started. So I think being curious, we did touch on it. There was a Ted Lasso reference back then. So I think what we're going to talk about, though, is there was so much anticipation coming up to August 17th, right? In terms of what it was, what it wasn't going to be, how buyers would react, how we'd converse with sellers, all these different things. And one thing that you and I kept coming back to is being curious instead of trying to explain and really bombard our clients. Asking questions is really important in understanding where they are.
Yeah. And I think we were seeing so much, I'm sure everyone was, but there was almost just this anticipation and this great hype for August 17th, right? Which fell on a Saturday randomly, right? But now we're in it. We're in it going on 3.5 weeks, and I think people are starting to get their stride. Lots of people felt like they made their stumbles. They said the wrong things. Let's face it, we all kind of have to go through that when we're going through something new. Right. But I also know that sometimes when we get really nervous, to your point, instead of being comfortable and curious and opening up and being able to ask questions and not being afraid of what we get in response, we tend to then just go with talking about our value, how great we are, all of these, we just talk at people, right? Yeah. So when Kevin and I were talking, we thought this is just a great thing, I think, to remind us of, yes, we are all getting into this new normal of things, but being curious and being comfortable when it comes to talking to both our buyers and sellers, right? Yes. And I think as we get into the conversation with buyers, let's think about it. They went from not having to necessarily sign anything. That's not true everywhere, but in a lot of locations, we went from not having a required buyer broker agreement to now all of a sudden a whole new conversation and talking points and getting buyers to sign with us, committing to compensating us for our time and the work that we do before they can even see a property. That's a big adjustment. And, so it's, again, let's realize that there are a lot of things that, there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of nerves. Let's just call it out as it is. For buyers, for some who are really tight on their budgets, they're in a really competitive market, it is this new idea of, oh my gosh, am I going to now, on top of paying for or trying to get this property, am I going to have to pay a 2.5%, 3% compensation for my agent out of my pocket, right? Let's be curious. Let's not be afraid of that conversation, because as agents, we know there's lots of different options. There's lots of different ways that the market is going to be helping them navigate how they can handle it depending on what they can afford. So I just think we have to not be afraid of asking questions and making sure we understand, what do they understand about the buyer broker agreement and how they pay things, right? Yeah. Making sure that we're doing that so that they can be a whole lot more comfortable.
Right, agreed. I think, and last week we talked about the survey from 1000 Watt, where we brought up that it was something over 60% of buyers that were surveyed actually understood that they were paying a commission. We're just shifting this conversation forward, right? So now when you begin to work with a buyer before you take them out to listings, now you're talking about compensation. And the thing to remember, whether it's with buyers that you just talked about or sellers, which we can talk about in just a moment, it is in reality not a one-day thing. Meaning this is going to be a conversation you have over the next 6 months, over the next year, as new buyers come into the market.
Sure.
Right? So it's not like this is going to be over at the end of September. It's not like it's going to be over at the end of the year. A lot of people haven't been paying attention or don't understand it or don't care to understand it if they're not currently buying or selling.
Right.
So this is your opportunity to perfect how you ask those questions. So when it comes to sellers, it's really about understanding how the compensation breakdown now is different than it was, right? We used to maybe have this whole conversation with sellers where we'd say, you pay X percent goes here, X percent goes there. that conversation has changed now. So being able to perfect that and doing so and asking what the seller has understood about the current process up front before you start unleashing and unloading your expertise on them, just like you described, where we get nervous or we get in and we're not sure what to say, so we just unload on somebody. This is a time where you ask questions. What do you understand? And over the, since August 17th to now and into the future, the headlines will change, right? Whether they're accurate or not, or they're clickbaity or not, the headlines are going to change, but understanding what your seller has read and what they understand about real estate and compensation is going to help you with your response.
Yeah, and I think to that point too, what's so important is if you're hearing us talk about this and this makes you nervous, thinking, oh my gosh, asking my clients questions and I don't feel well prepared to give them great answers, that's okay. But what we will say is that there's plenty of opportunity for you to get educated, right? I know here locally, we're doing tons of roundtables. We've got lots of role play options. But if you don't necessarily have that available, grab a colleague. You know the biggest objections, the biggest questions. You're reading the headlines just like the consumer is, right? So I think the idea is make sure that if you don't feel comfortable enough to be curious right now, where you can ask a lot of questions, then you need to figure out, what am I missing? Like, what do I not feel like I'm scripting well? And, I use the word script because, you've got to practice it. It's like an actor or actress learning their lines and knowing them so well so that when it's time to film, they are so believable. We kind of need to be the same way, Right. So making sure you've got the time, there's tons of resources. So I think that's the other thing for us as agents. If you're worried, it's okay. It's fixable. And the other thing is practice makes perfect. So you might have your script, you might, sit down and have a conversation with a buyer or seller. Some of those might not go perfectly, but odds are you're your worst critic, because I know that, I think we talk a lot about that, but you got to do it a few times in order to get a whole lot better at it.
Right.
So.
Practice it and learn from your mistakes. If it didn't feel comfortable, think about it afterwards. Where did you trip up, or where weren't your responses accurate, or what questions did you miss asking? Think about that, and always go back to your broker or manager if you have questions specific to your market. Like, I want to point that out too. Don't necessarily trust a YouTube video from someone in Washington State when you're working in the Southeast. Make sure you get local information from your leadership.
Yeah, good points. So don't be afraid to be curious. Build your confidence. This is a great opportunity. And remember, you are CEO of your own business. Guess what, my friends? You chose to start this business. So get excited about it. Get curious. You are great at what you do. And we hope that this was helpful.
Yeah.
Right?
You're the boss.
You're the boss. I like that. You're the boss. All right, make it a great Tuesday. Until we see you next time, remember,
you got this.
Yes, I let him do it this time.
Thanks for that.